Boneless Comics Podcast.
Boneless Comics Podcast.
Because they have no.
I'm Joe Getcho.
And I'm Mike White.
And this is We Like Comics Because They Have No Bones.
And thank you, everybody, for joining. If this is your first time listening, we are a clean comic book podcast that celebrates all things DC, Marvel, Image, Dark Horse, IDW, and more. Each episode will pick a comic book or comic-related media and review it, taking you on an exciting adventure to learn more. One of the other things you'll notice about our podcast is that it's a clean show. So we'll try to keep it appropriate for all ages, even when the story may be more mature. So for more comic book discussions, follow us on social media at Boneless Comics Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, and at Boneless Comics 1 on Twitter.
That's right. Also, make sure you check out our after shows, bonus content, and Spidey Joe's one-shots on our YouTube channel at tinyurl.com/Boneless Comics Podcast. And another announcement, thanks to the generous support of one of our listeners, we have launched a new website at bonelesscomicspodcast.com, and we've set up an Amazon store so you can easily shop for any of the comics, movies, whatever we've reviewed on this show. This is another way that you can support our podcast while also adding your favorites to your collection. So make sure you check it out, leave us a message, let us know what you think. And another announcement, if you're on LinkedIn, you can connect with me professionally at linkedin.com/in/Joel Getcho, and that is JOELGUETSCHOW. You'll have to replay that a couple times to get that down.
Yeah, your name is not one that if someone were to just look at it, they would be like, oh, that's Getcho.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So that's probably good that you explained that.
Yeah, it helps.
So today we're going to be reviewing Fantastic Four Solve Everything, which collects issues 570 to 574 from 2009, written by Jonathan Hickman and penciled by Dale Eaglesham, with backup pencils by Neil Edwards.
All right, so talking about the writer first, Jonathan Hickman, he's an American comic book writer and artist, but he's, by far recognized by his writing. So before he got into comics, he worked with web and CD-ROM development and later advertising, until he launched his debut comic book series, The Nightly News, and Pax Romana, both of which he wrote, drew, colored, and lettered through Image Comics.
Wow.
Hickman's written a lot of comics, and it's a long list, so I'm just going to focus on the Fantastic Four. So after doing some minor work for Marvel Comics, Hickman got his big break at the company with Secret Warriors, a team of superheroes run by Nick Fury and created by Brian Michael Bendis during Secret Invasion. After writing Dark Reign Fantastic Four, Hickman was given the job of regular writer for Fantastic Four. His run received more critical appreciation than the run it followed by Mark Millar and Brian Hitch, and it culminated in the story arc named 3, which featured the newsworthy death of the Human Torch. While he previously left Marvel to focus on his creator-owned titles, there was actually an announcement during Marvel's Next Big Thing panel at Comic-Con International San Diego that he's going to be returning to Marvel in 2023 alongside artist Valero Schiti, which I know how to pronounce his name because of our previous podcast episode. But they're coming back with a cryptic new title described as Sandman for the Marvel Universe. We recently did get some character designs at the New York Comic-Con, which the teaser, What Happens When the Powers That Be Meet the Natural Order of Things. So it looks like it might be a group title featuring Doctor Strange. So if you enjoy his writing, it will definitely be worth checking out when it launches next year.
Yeah, spoilers, but I enjoy his writing. I honestly would probably mention him in the same breath as Stan Lee and John Byrne as kind of like all-time creators for the Fantastic Four. There are certain writers that get them and certain writers that don't, and I would say that he has a pretty good handle on them. So the penciler today for at least 3 of the 5 issues that we're covering is Dale Eaglesham, a Canadian illustrator, and he's been active in the comic book industry since 1986, but most of his better known works are really just in the last couple of decades. So it took him a long time to really break through to the mainstream. He did some minor work for Marvel in the early to late 90s before signing an exclusive deal with DC that ended in 2009 when he returned to Marvel. And that's really when his career exploded, because he got titles like the Canadian super team Alpha Flight with writer Greg Pak, which he was really passionate about, stating, if there's anything different to my approach to this book, it will be an authenticity to the locales, because this is where I live. So Makes sense. Canadian artist,
Yeah.
Canadian superhero team. Once he landed his job on Fantastic Four and Steve Rogers' Super Soldier, however, he gained the nickname of the Evolutionary Jack Kirby, referring to his ability to make new creative art that still paid homage to Kirby's original work and designs. And I think that's honestly a pretty good segue into talking about his art because it feels modern, but it also feels traditional at the same time. It's very much like this is superhero art, and it's rooted in that kind of stock superhero look, but it still looks modern enough that you could pick it out and be like, well, that's not from the 60s. He has a lot of realistic facial expressions. His characters are very muscular, which is
Hmm.
actually something we can talk about particularly when we talk about Reed Richards later. But I think that he is able to handle like the wow factor of like the really big explosive action stuff as well as like the intimate character moments as well. And so that really matters for this title because you really need to be able to do both to
Yeah.
tell these kinds of stories. So it never distracted me from the narrative. I felt like it was a good fit for the title and I really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, the two backup issues by Neil Edwards were definitely a step down, in my opinion. Especially the facial expressions. Like there's one panel where Valeria, who's supposed to be a 3-year-old girl, her face looks like an old woman. And Franklin has kind of like this toothy expression in the last panel that makes it look like he's losing his mind while
Yeah.
he's like creating this pocket universe. So uh Franklin and Val are the Fantastic Four's kids, if you guys don't know. But yeah, especially at Franklin's birthday party too, which was one of the backup issues. A lot of the kids' faces looked more adult, not childlike, and that was just really distracting to me.
Hmm.
So yeah, I definitely prefer Eaglesham to Edwards.
Yeah, it was really strange. I started, especially not knowing who all the characters were. I kind of lost track a little bit because they just
Right.
look so different and weird. But
Yeah, they're off model.
yeah, I did find something notable or something else notable about Inglisham's work. For the first 2 years of his return to Marvel, his projects were uninked, which means it was colored and shot directly from his finished pencils. So that seems to be
Wow.
something maybe a little, is that daring? Is that like risky? Or
That's
is it,
very unusual.
yeah.
Um Typically you would want somebody to go and do a finish over your
Hmm.
work before you send it to the colorist. So that's pretty interesting.
I guess he's
I
just that good.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
All
that's
right.
that's incredible.
Well, that's enough on the writer and artist. Let's jump into our characters and story after this short clip.
The Fantastic Four, starring Reed Richards, Stu Richards, Johnny Storm, Ben Grimm. Reed Richards with his power to stretch. The Thing with the strength of 1,000 men. Johnny, Flame On, Torch, and Sue, the Invisible Girl. The Fantastic Four, united in their fight against interplanetary evil. Fantastic!
All right, welcome back. So if you're not familiar with the Fantastic Four, they are a superhero team, but more importantly, they're the first family that debuted in the Marvel Universe. The team consists of the couple, Reed Richards and Susan Storm, Sue's brother, Johnny Storm, and their family friend, Ben Grimm. They were forever changed during an experimental space flight that exposed them to cosmic rays, which gave them superhuman powers and abilities. In the aftermath of their incredible journey, the four pledged to stay together as a team. Reed has the ability to stretch his body to superhuman proportions and is called Mr. Fantastic. Sue can turn invisible and create force fields and is called the Invisible Woman. Johnny goes from hothead to turning his whole body ablaze and is called the Human Torch. And Ben Grimm drew the short straw, apparently, and became basically a rock monster called The Thing. Sorry, Ben. But the team quickly became media sensations. Their celebrity status only grew as they explored the uncharted regions of the universe and confronted evil wherever they found it. This story also features Reed and Sue's two young kids, Franklin, who is born with reality manipulating and psionic powers, and Valeria, who has her father's genius intellect and helps him with experiments, even though she's like 3 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a big deal and something I think that was only recently established maybe by Mark Millar before this run. So that was a very recent addition to their lore
Mm.
when Hickman started writing. But in Fantastic Four Solve Everything, Reed, Mr. Fantastic, discovers a multiversal organization of his own variants with one mission: solve everything. Every problem, every social injustice, every disease, they aim to stop it all. And they've been successful too, saving many worlds from destruction, from famine, war, or even the world eater Galactus. There's only one catch. In every reality, Sue will divorce or otherwise leave Reed Richards as he becomes more and more embroiled in his mission to save the multiverse from itself. None of the other Reeds have children because they became more and more occupied with their mission. And thus the choices presented to Mr. Fantastic: solve everything or be a father, a husband, and a man. So this may be a Fantastic Four story, but it's really more a character study of Reed Richards up until the last two issues, because the other characters really take a back seat to what he's doing. I'm going to bring up something that we never talk about, which is Star Trek, but this is akin to one of those character episodes that you get that might feature Worf or B'Elanna Torres or somebody a little more primarily than the whole cast. That's kind of what we have to kick off this run here. So it is a Fantastic Four story, but it's primarily about Reed to start off with. So, and it opens with a really cool, what I thought was a really cool framing device, which is a flashback to when Reed was a kid and his father is trying to get him to jump. It's like one of those trust falls where his father is going to catch him, and Reed's like, I don't want to. I'm scared. And he says, look at me, son. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to fail, but to say that you're not even willing to try, that's unacceptable, Reed. And right after that, he jumps, and that kind of leads us into the adventure of this story. And so this establishes right up front, like, family is going to be an important theme in this story, because we're starting with showing Reed as a kid with his father and how that relationship was. Yeah, I don't know. I thought that was really good because it really grounds the story in the real world before we get into the crazy science fiction stuff, because you kind of need that, because the story is going to get very wild from here on out. So
it's a little bit of like foreshadowing to sort of set up the choices that Reed makes later in our story. And I like this part of their relationship in the like first flashback, but in the next one, which we can talk about in a little bit, well, we'll talk about that. So anyway, but so this Reed is different from the other Reeds that are out there because of his family ties. But I also noticed that a lot of the Reeds were very different from what I was used to, because they were pretty beefy. Like we talked about in the art section, you know, that a lot of the characters were drawn very muscular, especially in the first couple of issues. And it was kind of weird because it's like, well, Johnny, I get, because he probably spends a lot of time in the gym. He's trying to impress the ladies, blah, blah, blah. But Reed spends all of his time sitting in a lab. He probably goes without eating for a long time because he's focused on his projects. So it seems like kind of a weird artistic choice rather than, you know, a story element like, oh, the cosmic rays really enhances metabolism, and so it just made him like all muscular. Like, you don't need to be muscular to be a scientist. You don't need to be muscular to be a stretchy guy. If anything, if you were like tall and lanky, that would probably fit, you know, Mr. Fantastic being able to stretch everything a lot better than like some, you know, bodybuilder who's like, oh, my muscles are tight, I can't, you know, stretch like I used to, or something like that. It's not,
he's ripped beyond the point of ridiculousness, and it is funny, because that's definitely not how I see Reed either. And I'm a long time, you know, reader of the Fantastic Four, but reader,
nice.
But yeah, I've never really seen him as a big beefy dude. I think artists that show him that he has like muscle tone is fine, but he doesn't need to be like super wide and have giant pecs and all this stuff. I mean, that's not really necessary.
It's one of those things that's really more of a nitpick than anything else. But at the same time, it's like you kind of notice it, like, it's a little weird. And then, you know, you get into the story and you forget about it. But I think it's actually more notable that Reed kind of already has a superpower way before the accident. He was born a super genius. And these, you know, stretchy powers that he got as an adult really just sort of give him another foray in which to be a superhero. But even if he didn't get those powers, he still could have been a superhero, or I guess a supervillain, depending on, you know, what reality it was from. But it seems like Doom fits that slot more so than any of the Reeds.
Yeah, well, the thing about Reed is I feel like his power is not as useful if he's not a genius. It's not really showcased in this story specifically, but there are stories where he's doing like physics calculations in his head about how far he needs to stretch or how he could bounce if he turns into a ball
Mm.
and all of these kinds of things. So it's one of those powers that it's not very flashy, but the shape shifting and the stretching can be made effective because his brain is so powerful.
It's kind of
So
like those things where you like, oh, the shadow of the ladder and then the rock next to the ladder and then the distance and like how
mhm.
high is that ladder and all that stuff that you're like, when am I ever going to use that? But Reed actually uses it with his own body. So he can
Yeah.
like, okay, I know exactly how far I need to stretch, how far I can stretch. So I know right away I can't, make that whatever it is. So
Mhm.
that's a neat aspect.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that the intellect definitely helps there, but it is much more common for his contribution to the team to be his intelligence, and not his superpowers. The others, I would say, definitely rely on their powers a lot more than he does.
Hmm.
So we move from really that flashback sequence into what could have been a story that was an entire issue, which is basically the wizard who's kind of a scientific rival for Reed. He's from way back the early days of Fantastic Four, has built robots that can each kill one of the FF, and they're each programmed to kill one of them. And they're in the middle of this crazy fight scene where they're all, using their powers and trying to work together and find a way to split the robots up so that they fight the ones that aren't programmed to kill them. And they get through it, and then we find out at the end that it's already been resolved, and it's just Reed basically telling Val and Franklin a bedtime story, which is like, here's what we did today. And I think he even ends it with, I'd really rather talk about like what we explored or what we discovered, not our adventures fighting supervillains, because you hear enough about that from your uncles Ben and Johnny or something like that. So
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of a nice moment. But again, I thought it was cool that we saw the crazy sci-fi stuff, but then he used it to segue into showing like Reed and Sue being parents as well. So, which is something that really, sets this book apart from other books.
And the like
So,
relationship between them too, because it's not that where you have a power couple, and so the drama is seeing them fight and seeing them bicker and they split up and
no.
that sort of thing. It's like this is the family element where we have the parents, the children, they're all together, and that's probably really hard to do from a storytelling perspective because we don't get that a whole lot. Like I said, usually we get
Mm-hmm.
the like cliched family drama where the kids go to bed and then the parents start to fight and bicker and the kids don't know any better and that sort of thing. But
Right.
there's a little bit of straining, I think, just kind of natural with Reed being so obsessive over his science, and not that
Mm-hmm.
he abandons his children, because obviously he doesn't. He's there with them, but he
Yeah.
does spend a lot of time on his own reflecting, and he has a man cave which has like scrawling, writing all over it. So basically anything's a whiteboard that he can write on for his equations and stuff like that. So he retreats in there a lot. So there is a little bit of tension, but it's not like, oh, this is going to tear the family apart. It's just enough to be like, okay, they're normal people,
Yeah.
okay, but we do get some fun moments too between Johnny and Ben, who are like in the background, and Johnny's pulling a fast one on Ben by he's got like these envelopes and he's like, hey Ben, pick one,
I.
and he's like, oh, I picked this one, and then he's like, hey wait, these are all the same, and it's just happening in the background. It was like a fun moment, and I think that's the great dynamic of the Fantastic Four is like
Mm-hmm.
you have the family element, you have the relationship, you have the goofy guys kind of in the background, but then with Sue and Johnny being brother and sister, there's that family element, and there's a lot that
Mm-hmm.
goes on just with these four characters. They're very diverse in that aspect as far
Mm-hmm.
as the family goes.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's good, and something you may not have been super aware of before reading this story is that the kids had not really been super present in a lot of Fantastic Four stories unless they needed them for a plot reason. Writers would tend to find reasons to write Franklin out of stories so that they didn't have to deal with him. And then even Valeria came into the picture in like the late 90s, at first as like a future teenage variant of herself, and then later as a baby that it's a very complicated explanation how she was like sucked through time and, stored in some pocket universe and then came back out. But anyway, it's
Okay.
it's science fiction, it's Fantastic
Sure.
Four, so that's what it is. But both of those characters, writers tended to not want to deal with them. So I personally enjoyed it because they gave Val the ability to be just as smart, if not smarter than Mr. Fantastic, even though she's 3 years old, I think she says
Hmm.
at one point. So that opens up all kinds of story possibilities because she can invent crazy things. Like she invents some sort of like horse that's mechanical that they can latch onto the Fantastic Car with and go on adventures with their uncles when they're not supposed to. And something we find out, actually, you don't find out what Franklin's birthday present is in this story, but what she makes him, what you find out in the next volume, is he wanted like a Nintendo 3DS, I think is what he wanted. And she made a device that would play all handheld games across time
Nice.
and gave that to him instead. So that was,
Sweet.
yeah, yeah, really cool. So, like her intellect is already like insane, especially for a 3-year old. It's just that she still has that like precociousness and the sort of sense of mischief, and definitely like her older brother encourages that too, because
Sure.
he's like, yeah, let's go break the rules, let's go, do this. And I even like how she logics out of them being told what to do at a later point in the story, because they're like, well, you're not old enough to go on vacation with Ben and Johnny. And she's like, that's not fair. And Franklin's like, why is that? And she's like, because you're about to have a birthday, so you're gonna be older. And it's like, oh, okay. I guess that's so yeah,
Yeah.
but it was a lot of fun for me for them to actually, or for Hickman to actually bring them in and make them characters, as
Hmm.
opposed to just kind of sidelining them and forgetting that they're there, because that
Yeah.
that tends to be what we do.
Well, and they don't want to take them on, these excursions or adventures with them
No.
because they're just kids. But at the same time, like, how do you have a family of superheroes and, you know, A, who's going to babysit the kids because they have powers of their own? They're going to get outsmarted and
Hmm.
they're going to get, I don't know, psionic powered.
Yeah.
And, and, at the same time, like, if you just don't have them in the story, it's like, well, what are they doing? Are they just,
Yeah.
playing around the Baxter building and
Hmm.
not getting into trouble? You're like, yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah, so it was, I think it was good that they were there, and they added a little bit of extra humor, well, which Ben and Johnny did too, which is good because this story is, I don't want to say that it's heavy as far as the events, but kind of like thematically, it's pretty heavy, because what Reed is dealing with when he discovers this other reality is, well, so basically he's made a room where he's got 100 of his greatest ideas that he's never finished or never dealt with yet or whatever. And whenever he needs to go think, he goes and thinks about these ideas. And in this room is the biggest idea, which is solve everything. And that's
Mhm.
exactly what it sounds like. It's like, let's get rid of hunger, let's get rid of injustice, let anything that's a problem, basically, he wants to apply his mind to solving that. And so once he starts kind of working towards that, is it the Council of Reeds that actually contact him? I he's
Yeah, I
he's
think
built a
so.
machine, but I think they actually create a bridge to him because they're like, oh, you're pursuing this now. Well, this is what we're all doing.
Hmm.
And so that really is the jumping off point for the story, where he discovers this pocket that exists like outside time and space, that he can go and be with all of his other counterparts. And there's, I think, two of them that they introduce him to. Like one looks a little bit like Johnny because he's on fire, and another one looks a little bit like Ben because he's got like rock skin. And they're like, yeah, we picked these on purpose to make you feel more comfortable, kind of thing. So that was interesting too. But
Yeah.
very quickly we get into what is going to be the theme of this, which is, if you have the great intellect on a level that's beyond everybody else's, what then is your responsibility to do with that? And so that's kind of what this story is hitting upon, but it also puts him at odds a little bit with his family, because it's such a big undertaking that, you know, the other reads are like, well, you can't have a family and do this. Like that's not going to work, basically. So we you either devote your entire life to it, or, you know, or you don't do it. So that's the big, I guess the moral dilemma or the ethical dilemma in this story is like, do you pick your family, or do you pick solving everything?
Yeah. Well, and like these guys, you know, they're not messing around, because one of the I don't like what do you call them? They're all Reed, but one of the Reeds
Mhm.
shows him, like our Reed shows him this planet where it's basically just farmland, the entire planet.
Mhm.
And he's like, I'm looking to, you know, solve hunger, so I have, you know, this with all of this food, so that way I can solve hunger. And our Reed is like, oh, that's great, you know, you have an entire planet and we can feed the whole world and blah blah blah. And the other Reed's like, you got to stop thinking so small. This is actually one of many planets that I have, and we're looking to cure hunger in the multiverse. Like, these are some huge stakes, and, you know, things that these,
Mhm.
well, there aren't stakes because they're farmland and it's all vegetables, but you know what I mean? Like, the stakes are big because, you know, they're trying to solve this on a like multiversal scale. And like
Mhm.
all of the Reeds, they all kind of have their own specialties, or things that, like, they each tackle the problem from a different aspect. And so it's really neat because it's like, you know, when you focus on something as one person, you know, I'm going to focus on this and I'm going to focus on that and I'm going to
Mhm.
focus on this, and you try to solve various different problems. Reed, in his, you know, various different forms, is able to tackle these problems one at a time, but it's like different versions of the same guy. So it's almost like, you know, they're not really symbiotic, but it's almost like, you know, you see yourself like solving all these problems, like,
Mhm.
wow, this is great. You know, this is a great team of people who are, you know, super smart doing all this stuff. And I think it's really cool that, you know, Reed isn't, he's not conceited. He's not like, well, I'm smarter than you, you're dumb,
Mhm.
whatever. He doesn't treat people like that. I mean, he does talk about like the burden of his, you know, intellect, in that, you know, like, hey, when he's talking to Sue, it's like, I realize I'm gone and, you know, I'm doing all this stuff, but like, you know, I've got this intellect, I've got to do something with it. I've got to, you know, other people can't understand what it is that I'm going through because this is very specific. So he doesn't flash it around
Right.
and flaunt it. And so it's funny because the Council of Reeds, if you've seen the Flash TV show on the CW, they adapted a more comical version of this in 2017 with the Council of Wells, named after Harrison Wells. So
Mhm.
the biggest thing for the Council of Reeds was that, like, they had their own meeting hall, warning systems. They each had infinity gauntlets complete with all of the stones, but they only worked in their own universe. So it's not like they could, you know, come together in this pocket universe, so they could all go rule one universe. So there was like
Mhm.
a stipulation to that. But it was really neat to see, like, you know, all of the Reeds that, like, they have all of this stuff. Like, they're not some low budget, like, hey, you know, there's a little
No.
portal and here's a hologram of you and let's have a conversation. It's not like that kind of council. It's like, there is a pocket dimension where we have our own, you know, hall of justice, or whatever.
Yeah.
And, you know, we can step through these gateways. You can see my, you know, multiple planets where I have all the food. Here's my wheat planet. Here's my cone planet. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, my corn planet, and celery, you know, whatever. It's cone. So anyway, it was really neat to see all of that because it's like its own expansive universe in this like little pocket.
Yeah. It is interesting the way that they try to, it's almost like an indoctrination, because they're showing him the good first. They're like,
Hmm.
"Okay, so you've seen the planet with the all the food, right?" And he's like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Okay, cool. Well, that'll make what comes next easier."
Yeah.
And then, so we start to have some doubts about them when we see how they're dealing with Victor Von Doom, who is absolutely one of the worst villains in the
Yeah.
Marvel universe, like undeniably. He's horrible, he's a big problem. But what the Council of Reeds have decided to do is, in each of their realities, they find Doom and they basically lobotomize him so that all he can say is Doom, and he's just a vegetable. And then they just lock up all the vegetable Dooms in a room. Vegetables are really a theme in this
Vegetable
discussion today.
dooms in a
Is
room.
vegetable Doom in a room? Yeah, they just lock them up in a room where they all say Doom all the time and just leave them there. And
Yeah.
so at this point, our Reed goes, "This is wrong. And I think is it one of the other ones that's like, well, of course it's wrong, but it's
It's
necessary.
necessary. Yeah.
And so that's where a little bit of doubt starts to creep in, where it's like, maybe these guys aren't 100% on the level, but they do amazing things. Like they save a dying universe where like there's a star that's about to detonate and destroy this whole galaxy or something. They actually just destroy Galactus in one of the realities where he's trying to eat a planet. And they also have to fight Celestials at one point, which is, if you don't know what they are, they're kind of like the gods of the Marvel universe. I mean, they're supremely powerful cosmic beings that travel the universe. So although that one is kind of their own fault because they're discovered by them, and then the Celestials are like, oh, this is a great pocket dimension, we should kill you all and use it for our own purposes. So
Sure.
yeah,
Hostile takeover.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, the whole Doom thing, like, is definitely meant for, shock value for us to sympathize with our read and go like, hey, these guys, they're left to their work, they've left their families or their families have left them. And, they're doing all this great stuff, but they also have to make some really hard choices. But at the same time, like, I kind of wondered about the, like, what are they missing besides, you take the family element out and usually it's, well, they're missing emotion. Like they're just cold and calculating and they don't really care. But these guys are trying to solve things that, apply on the multiversal scale, but also from anything to, world hunger to vanquishing supervillains. So, they're tackling
Right.
all kinds of problems. But I was just like, I don't know, your combined intellect, you could probably come up with something that makes him like, instead of getting rid of his higher brain functions, just maybe make him a little bit less dumb. So he's not staying in a room going, doom, 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 just like a vegetable doom in a room.
Yeah.
But, pacify him with endorphins, make him fall in love with a hologram so he can never leave. Like, there's got to be something that they can do. But I guess they're like, he is so dangerous that we cannot give him an inch. But it's interesting that they're not willing to make the decision of, we need to kill him in every reality, because that would be the like cold calculating rationale. Like, well, we don't care that it's a life, it's Dr. Doom and he takes more lives than he's worth, so we need to go all Punisher and get a sniper in every reality and hit him up. They take him, they pacify him, and they just store him in a room. And it's that question of like, well, which is worse? But aside from that, our council of reads, like, this is the decision that they made. So it's like, well, what is it that they are missing that our Reed has, because he's not willing to abandon his family? And I think that's kind of what you see.
Well, they do. Reed, even in the Marvel 616 universe, over the years has traditionally had issues with being dispassionate. And that does come up in his marriage sometimes. And Sue will have to kind of snap him back and be like, hey, you're like, you're losing yourself in this again. And because that is a tendency, that's probably his main character flaw that he has, is he can lose himself in the science and start to get away from like the real people and stuff like that. And so the familial relationships are really what ground him and keep him on Earth, so to speak, where he's not going to just completely lose himself and become some kind of crazy mad scientist. Not that he would become immoral, like a Dr. Doom or something like that, but just that he would probably be a lot more dispassionate person if he wasn't married, if he didn't have the kids, if he didn't have Ben and Johnny around all the time. I mean, Ben is his best friend from college. They go way back, so there's that friendship there as well. And then, Johnny's obviously his brother-in-law. So yeah, I think that is what ultimately makes him different, but also some of the discussions that his father had with him in the flashbacks are, I think, also factor into it too, because his father kind of is that guy. His father kind of is the guy that let the science be his main thing, and he kind of just left Reed at a certain age.
Yeah.
And to go time travel, which is what they don't really explain that in this story, but that's from previous stories. We had not seen Nathaniel Richards until the John Byrne run in the 1980s. So that means there's like 20 years of Fantastic Four comics where you don't see Reed's father at all. And so when they do meet, it's not exactly like a happy, it's kind of like a, where have you been all these years, you know?
Yeah. Well, and that's
And
the difference between dispassionate and, like cold and calculating.
right.
It's like Stick on Daredevil, either the Netflix series or even in the
Mhm.
comics, in the Netflix series, Stick is training Matthew at a young age, and Matthew's like, hey, I really appreciate this. I made you this little bracelet. And Stick is immediately like, we're done. That's it. You want this emotional connection, but I'm training a weapon. So because of that, peace out. And he leaves. And we fast forward like 20 years, kind of
Yeah.
similar to that. And,
Mhm.
same thing. Matt's like, where have you been? You just up and left me. Like, what the heck?
Mhm.
And he's like, oh, I knew you'd be
Mhm.
fine. I knew it's a similar thing here where it's like his dad is like encouraging him and telling him all these things, but he's like, I know that you're going to be okay. And, you're super smart and all that stuff. So, my work's important. You'll be fine. So he uses that to justify abandoning his son.
Yeah. Which is pretty crappy.
Yeah, very
Um
crappy. Give up
but
attachments.
I think that having that experience in a way too uh helped Reed to be like, I'm not going to be that guy. Like, I'm not going to give up my family, because he knows exactly what that feels like, you
Hmm.
know. So, I don't know how it played out for the other Reeds and the other realities, but this one specifically in ours has that experience of knowing what the other side, is experiencing. So I very much think he's like, I'm not going to inflict that on Sue. Although even in this story, she does have to have a discussion with him early on where she's like, okay, you've been spending a lot of time in the lab. I'm trying to be patient with you, but just remember that we're out here and that we still exist. And at first he kind of blows her off a little bit, but then he's also like, she starts to get kind of mad because she's like, you're predicting what I'm gonna say again. That's something you always do. And he's like, well, I've studied all these things. I've studied the galaxy. I've done all of that. But the one thing I've studied the most is you, because of our relationship. So sorry, that I know what you're gonna say, but like, it's
Yeah.
they're in other words, he's like, that's his very nerdy way of being romantic,
Instead
in a
of
way.
finishing
But
each other's sentences, he's finishing all of her sentences.
right. So, which I'm sure is really frustrating.
Yeah.
But I thought what was really interesting is then you cut to later in the story, and she's outside the lab and she's like, Reed, I know that your intellect is something that isolates you. I know that it's something that sets you apart. And I know that there's stuff that you have to do that we just can't understand. So I'm just going to trust that you're going to do the right thing and leave you to it and allow you to kind of be yourself. And that was interesting reading it now, because just in the past week, my girlfriend and I have been having these discussions about being our authentic self and what does that look like in a relationship, and how do you basically give the other person the freedom to do that within the boundaries of a relationship. And so I thought that was kind of cool to see a little bit of a parallel in the relationship here, where Sue was like, I am frustrated with you, but also I get it, and you've got to be yourself. Like, you can't be anybody but yourself. And so that, again, it's neat because there is a little bit of drama in the relationship, but it's not like the drawn out, like, oh, we're going to get a divorce, we're shouting at each other.
Hmm.
It's not stuff like that. It's more them finding compromises and ways to coexist as a loving couple,
Or
which I
figure out
think,
how to be supportive with what each
yeah.
other needs, which Reed needs a lot. So that's why she's usually focusing
Yes.
on him. But when she wants to
Right.
be left alone, she can just turn invisible. So kind of not fair.
It's true. Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that. If she wants a day by herself, there are comics too where she'll go with like She-Hulk and Hellcat and something, and have like a girls' night out or something and get
Hmm.
away from the kids. So I mean, that is a thing that happens. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that Reed and Sue and their relationship is very well written in this, and I buy it. I buy why Reed would be like, no, I'm not going to leave that behind to go gallivanting around the universe. And he ends up actually deleting his access point to the Council of Reeds at the end of this story, because he realizes how much, and a lot of it is they're kind of cutting in with the flashback to his father, right?
Yeah.
while Sue is talking to him. I think it's cutting back and forth between those two things. And you kind of understand that, like, okay, yeah, he was abandoned as a kid and he has a lot to lose.
And
I
he's
don't know.
not willing,
Yeah.
not willing to give that up on his side of the family and
Mhm.
everything, and have his family, go through what he went through essentially. And it's
Right.
surprising that none of the Reeds had that, same experience, that our Reed is
Mhm.
unique in that way. But at the same time, like there's a lot of factors to it, I think, that they show us that lead
Mhm.
into that decision. It's not just one thing, not just his father, but the relationship he has with the kids and everything that he's gone through
Mhm.
with, the team, the family, that sort of thing. And they've been a family, at least the Fantastic Four has been a group for so long at this point, that it's not like, even though the kids are young, they've been at this a while. So it's not like
Right.
something that, maybe earlier on it would be more tempting to leave it all behind. But at this
Mhm.
point, there's no way. Like, he doesn't even really give it a second thought.
No, no, not
He's going,
really.
well, that was fun. Delete. We're done.
Yeah, a bunch of them die too. I should mention this is not the last time that the council shows up, because later in the run, spoilers, if you're gonna read the run, these are spoilers. But later in the run, Val actually discovers the dimension herself
Oh,
and
nice.
makes contact with them. And Reed isn't willing to seek help from them, but they need their assistance with something, later on. So that's actually pretty interesting that it's actually a story thread that's picked up later. But for Reed's character himself, this is very complete.
Hmm.
It's very much he's come full circle. He's like, I'm not willing to make that compromise.
All
So
right. Well, with that, I think that's a good stopping point for this segment of the story. We will be right back with you to finish out the story, and stay tuned for more.
hey everybody, welcome back. So I think continuing on with this story, this is really an A story and a B story, and then the B story kind of takes over in the last two issues. So the
Hmm.
B story for the first three was Ben and Johnny are going to go on this vacation to New World, which, to briefly explain it, is a world created by Ted Castle and Alyssa Moy, because they believe that Earth 616 would be uninhabitable in 30 years. It also has a lot of weird alternate versions of Marvel characters that are refugees from the future, like this guy called Banner Jr., who's an intelligent
Mm.
Hulk. And I think there's somebody named Lightwave, and there's all kinds of crazy characters. Alyssa Moy, who actually was Reed's college girlfriend before Sue, she is just a brain in a robot body. I'm not real sure why. I do believe that this stuff came apart during the Mark Millar run right before this, but I didn't read it. Sorry, I haven't read 100% of Fantastic Four's lore, even though I do own a lot of issues, and you guys will get to see those in the after show. But yeah, I'm not real sure how that happened to Alyssa, because last time I saw her, she was, kind of dressed like Indiana Jones and running around having adventures. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's New World. And yeah, I would assume you didn't know anything about that coming in, and you were a little bit
No, it
perplexed
was
by
very
it.
strange because I was like, where are they going on vacation? And they go to this like post-apocalyptic looking, with robots pointing guns at them and all this stuff. And they're in their vacation clothes and they're being held by at gunpoint. And I'm just like, what the heck? Why would you want to go to vacation here? And sort of trying to piece together that like, oh, okay, this is, something different. Because when they called out Banner Jr., I was like, wait, Junior? I don't remember. Was he a
Mhm.
junior? But yeah, it's a different different reality, because they mentioned
They're
Castle at one point, and I was like, Frank Castle, but no, it's like Ted
No,
Castle.
Ted Castle and Alyssa Moy Castle. Yeah, I don't know much about them except that he's a scientist that created this world, and most of the people are from the future. So Banner Jr. would be like several generations removed from our Bruce Banner.
Ah, okay.
And things like that. So a lot of them are future or alternate future versions of characters that we know. And I guess their world got destroyed or something. I don't really know, but
Yeah.
somehow they became refugees and they ended up on New World. So that's
All
where
right.
this that's where these characters come from. But the last time they were there, the New World Susan Storm had died, and they had a funeral for her. And then there was like they basically had peace afterwards, and it seemed like it was going to be a good place. So yeah, they were expecting a little bit different reception than like robots or Ultron robots trying to kill everybody, which I think was part of what was trying to kill them, not the only thing.
Yeah, there was a lot happening there very quickly, because I think it was just, the what, third issue was just like full of it. And I'm just like, it's very different from the first couple issues and the story arc, that we talked about in the previous segment. So it was it was a little jarring, I think.
Yeah. The art is too, because honestly, beyond the issues I mentioned earlier, another issue that I have is the way that they draw Ted Castle and the way that they draw or that Neil Edwards draws Franklin Richards as an adult later are almost identical. Which is kind of a problem for me because that makes it very confusing for the reader, because it's very important that we recognize that Franklin has come as an adult from the future later on in the birthday issue, but when you see him, you're like, oh, that looks like Ted Castle. So it's kind of like maybe try and change the character model a little bit. I don't know, but
just use a recolor at least.
yeah. But they have really just kind of a one issue wacky adventure. Ben is like extremely annoyed because he was looking forward to a relaxing vacation, so he's just trashing robots left and right. And the inhabitants of this world, I think, want to kidnap Valeria so that she can repair the portal to get them out of there, which is funny because Ted Castle won't pay any attention to her. He's like, oh, you're just a kid, you don't have anything to contribute. But she actually is like, well, I brought a power source, and also I know how to fix this portal. So she's like,
well, it's going to require math equations. And she's like, oh yeah, I can do that.
So it's very funny where this Castle guy is just kind of dismissing her the whole time. And it's like, no, she's like literally your ticket out of here. That's how you're going to survive. So this issue did feel like Hickman really trying to just write off story elements from a previous creator that he didn't want to deal with, because he ends up destroying New World, and then our main cast of characters, Franklin, Val, Ben, and Johnny, get out. But I think a lot of those characters don't. At least Ted Castle, I believe, dies or he stays behind or something. So it really felt like we're just trying to move past this stuff in continuity so we don't have to deal with it, and then let's get on to the next thing. So which that leads into Franklin's birthday party, which which is actually a really fun issue. Again, we've done all the crazy sci-fi stuff, we've had lots of action, but they're still making time to show the different family members and what they're going through. So Franklin has a birthday party, and there's a lot of other Marvel kids that are invited to it. The Power Pack, Katie, and I can't think of all of their names. There's an Alex Power. He's like the older one that's about to go to college, I think. Is there actually Bentley, who is a clone of the Wizard, the villain in the first issue of this collection? He attends the party. Although he's like, my name isn't Bentley, my name is 32 because I'm the 32nd clone. And
Sue's that was the like, last Wayoon.
Yeah, Sue's like, well, do you want some cake? And he's like, 32 would like a corner piece or something like that. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. So what I didn't know, you probably hadn't heard of a lot of these kids except Leech. No. Leech, you've probably seen X-Men The Last Stand, which he's kind of a story point in that movie, but he is actually the green kid with like the yellow eyes in this. And then his brother Artie is a mutant with like purple skin and yellow eyes. And Artie is mute, but he's supposed to communicate through like mental projections that people can see. And so that's some like an ability that he had lost. So he gets a gift in this issue that allows him to communicate again. And then Leech, his ability, which is not a mistake why he was here, is that he neutralizes all other mutant powers that are around him. So as we're going to find out in the very next collection, there's a reason that Reed wants him at this party, and it's to adopt him. And it's partially to make Leech happy, but it's partially because they're terrified of what Franklin's powers can do unchecked. And so if Leech is around all the time, then Franklin can't use his powers, because for the purposes of the Marvel Universe, Franklin is considered a mutant. So because he's born with, that X factor or whatever it is. So there's a little bit of strategy going on there.
Yeah. Too. Well, don't forget that Dragon Man is there. There's this old Fantastic Four game where Dragon Man shows up and it plays this funky music. It's Dragon Man's hilarious.
I think I've got the disc somewhere. I might still have the PS1 game somewhere.
Nice.
Because I did own it at some point. So one of the fun things about that was you could put it in a CD player, and it would play all the audio from the game. But there were several tracks that just repeated the audio from the FMVs, like over and over and over. And so, what was it? It was like, "You madman! It's
let us go!
Let us go!"
You know I can't.
No, that's not within my character.
Yeah, just cheesy like lines. You just hear them by themselves on the CD. That was
very very funny.
Well, we also at the birthday party have an appearance by Spider-Man.
Yeah, because Franklin says he's my favorite superhero.
Yes.
To which Johnny goes,
my favorite character now.
Spider-Man sucks. Johnny's like, that guy sucks.
So there's this rivalry between the Human Torch and Spider-Man, and it's more like like bros picking on each other. They're not like, they don't hate each other, but they definitely like there's this really great issue where like the FF are kind of, out of the story loop, and Peter buys the Baxter building and he goes, it's under new management. And so Johnny is featured in that issue. And so Peter takes him on a tour, and there's this like big statue of the Fantastic Four in like action poses and stuff. And there's a caption that's like, never forget or something like that. And he's, Johnny's like, all right, the building's in good hands. I appreciate it. Like, Peter was very sensitive to that. So they're like friends, but they won't really like come out and say, hey, we're good buds. They're more like, kid rivals and that sort of thing. And they poke fun at each other. So it's always a fun time when they get together, which, wasn't the point of this story, but it was just hilarious because you get Johnny earlier, like, Spider-Man, I'm going to let you know a secret. Spider-Man, he sucks. And then they have like some guy show up who's got a shirt that barely fits over his like hairy belly.
That guy?
And he's like, look, it's the spectacular Spider-Man. And it's this guy, and he's like, oh, and they're like, that's not Spider-Man. And then Spider-Man's like perched on Ben Grimm's back, and he's like, I thought Spider-Man was here. Where is he? And Spider-Man's like back here the whole time. And they're like, ah! That was funny. I really enjoyed that. I hope in the, future movie version or whatever we get of the FF that we get something like that, because it's lighthearted and it's funny, and it's just, a bunch of characters. Like, it's a really weird group of characters that, that we mentioned that are in this group. But it's really funny when you get all these characters together and they're just, laughing, having a good time. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to see them let their hair down and not be serious all the time, especially after we were literally dealing with the fate of the entire multiverse and the issues before this. To come down to something smaller and more personal is kind of a good come down. Although,
a good way to end it too.
A good way to end it as well. Although they do leave some threads to be picked up later, because a future version of Franklin shows up and overpowers the FF really easily, and then he basically goes in a room with Val, tells her a bunch of stuff that only she's supposed to know, and then leaves. And so that all is stuff that is going to be picked up later. There's actually a war coming between like Atlantis, the Inhumans, the High Evolutionary, and I think there's one other faction I'm forgetting. It might be the Moloids, the Mole Man's people. But that's all stuff that's kind of upcoming, and Val is kind of the key to getting them through that in a lot of ways. So Franklin's come back in time to talk to her, but you wouldn't know that it's him, except that after he's this weird adult that's just overpowered the team comes in and says all this crazy stuff to Val. She's like, one more thing. And he goes, what? She's like, happy birthday, retard. And he's just like, all right, you figured out who I am. And
Yeah, it's kind of a not a pretty word to use there, but I,
right.
they're siblings, so I'm not speaking from experience because I don't have any siblings, but
Yeah.
it's that like, friendly joking, like, because she's
Mhm.
the smart one, and it's not that he's dumb, he's
No.
probably average, but and he obviously has his own powers, but it's
Uh-huh.
just a nickname that she, used for him just to poke fun and be like, hey, I'm the smarter one, that kind of
Right.
thing. So
Yeah. Yeah. It was a lot of fun. So Leech, Artie, Bentley, the clone, Dragon Man, who's wearing
oh, sorry.
who's wearing spectacles and is super smart now, as well as a couple of Moloid children, all will be adopted by the Fantastic Four in the
Wow.
next trades, and they eventually form the Future Foundation, which are
Mm.
it's kind of led by Val, but it's their own version, like their own council, basically to solve problems. Except they're kids and aliens and robots and all this stuff, and so they have like wildly inventive ideas about how to go about fixing things. So that's actually pretty cool because that sets up that book, which is then going to like splinter off into its own thing. So, and then they were both running at the same time as Fantastic Four, and they were both written by Hickman. So that's kind of neat because it's all like foreshadowing for that later period. So yeah.
All right. Anything else on Fantastic Four solve everything?
No, I think we're ready to move to final thoughts.
All right, we are back for final thoughts and ratings. So, how many bananas shall we give this story? It's really hard to be on a podcast with your best friend and rate something that features his favorite character. And I would want him to be kind because, if you can't tell, I like Spider-Man. There's some Deadpool back
Right.
there. There's other stuff on the shelf too, but it's kind of like my favorite. So to,
Mhm.
you know, to be able to rate something objectively and say, hey, you like these characters, but maybe they're not, for me, it's really hard. But no, I enjoy the Fantastic Four. I think they have a really unique dynamic, and I really like that they've, been able to stay for the most part as a family over time and keep
Mhm.
the, core of their group intact. So for this particular story arc, though, the fourth issue really kind of tanked it for me. Like I was moving along, I was enjoying, I was like, okay, this Council Reed's thing is neat, but then Reed just closes the door on it, and then that's it. Which I guess if you close the door to an interdimensional portal, then yeah, that would be it, because it's not like you're gonna
Right.
find them at the local coffee shop. How you doing, Reed? Good, Reed. Hey, so I haven't seen you around the council lately. It's not going to be like that. Like once you shut that portal
Mhm.
off, it's done. But it was really weird from a story perspective. I think that we just cut that off and then that was it. We did something completely different on New World, and then we sort of came back to our main story and had the birthday party, and then that, the sort of setup for the future. So I think if you were to call this like a
Mhm.
five issue story arc, I didn't like the last half. But if you say, well,
Okay.
this was, we started the story, we did something else for an issue, like if you look at a 12 episode, season of something, you
Mhm.
wouldn't rate the entire season based on the first 5 episodes. Well, maybe some people would, but you might get the first couple where we set up the plot, and then we do some filler, we do something else, and then we come back to the story and finish it out later.
Mhm.
So I would have to read more to really be able to, I think, give this a true rating. But if I'm going to, put a number to this of what we read, for this episode, I would have to give it a 3 out of 5
Okay.
because
Okay.
I liked it. I didn't like it. I think maybe I could give it a 3.5 because it was really that one issue, like I said, that tanked it for me. But I just,
Mm.
that cutoff point with the Council of Reeds, I was just like, so that's it. We're done. Did I go too far? Am I reading something else? Like, where did it go? Just
Yeah.
left me a little lost. So maybe that's, again, unfair for just looking at these like 5 issues, but that's what I'm gonna go
Mhm.
with.
So something that I can say, having read the entire run, is something that Jonathan Hickman likes to do a lot is throw an idea at you, throw an idea at you. Here's another idea. Here's another idea. And the next 3 trades are just like crazy idea factory of like, and then this insane thing happens. and they go to Atlantis, they go to the moon to see the Inhumans, they go to see the High Evolutionary on Wundagore. Not Woundagore, right?
No, not Woundagore. Wundagore.
Okay.
Yeah.
But wounds have gore. All right, I'm done. I'm sorry.
Moving on.
Yeah. So what I enjoy about it, knowing the full context of the Fantastic Four, is that that's very much the spirit of the early issues of Fantastic Four. When Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were writing this book, it was not a static thing where we just went back to the status quo at the end of every issue. Reed and Sue started off and they were kind of on again, off again, dating. They eventually got married. They eventually had a kid. There are changes, long-term changes that would happen during their run on the book. And they also were just spitting out characters left and right to try that started in Fantastic Four, like the Black Panther, like Silver Surfer and Galactus, Adam Warlock. I can't even mention them all. Black Bolt and all of the Inhumans. All of those started as like backups in the FF. So to me, the fact that he has that sense of creativity and just throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall, and also the fact that he mastered having Reed speak in very techno-babbly language, but also still being a family man, that bumps it up for me, because not every writer can do that. There are a lot of writers that will be able to do the dispassionate science stuff, but they can't write the family stuff, or they can write the family stuff, but he seems dumb. He specifically is a really hard character for people to crack, I think. So while I agree with you, that story does kind of end, and then we're on to the next thing, and it is very abrupt because he just shuts the door. He walks out and Sue's waiting for him, and it's like, okay, well, he's going to be with his family now. And there's not really a resolution there. I don't think it bothers me that much, because I'm more just so excited that the characterizations are so on point for everybody. So I'm actually going to give it a 4. So a full number difference. I don't think this is like an all-time great best Fantastic Four story, but I do think that it's one of those that you should probably read if you're interested in getting into like the modern era of their comics. So
yeah, they are written very well. That's true. So that's definitely a huge part of it, is you want to believe the characters and you want them to stay true to, especially if you're a long-term fan, that they stay true to what you've experienced in the past. So if you have enjoyed this episode and you want to purchase Fantastic Four Solve Everything for yourself, check out our Amazon store at bonelesscomicspodcast.com.
And tell us your thoughts by posting a comment on social media at Boneless Comics Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, and at Boneless Comics 1 on Twitter. And wherever you post, be sure to use our hashtag Boneless Comics Podcast.
That's right. And make sure you subscribe and leave a rating and review, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for episodes, after shows, behind the scenes content at tinyurl.com/Boneless Comics Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, but next time we have
a discussion on Justice Society of America, Black Rain, by Jeff Johns and Rags Morales. So until then, thank you for listening, and don't forget to check out our after show where we'll discuss more of the Fantastic Four.
Dragon Man.
We like
Comics?
because